Welcome to Familiar Territory, an anime podcast hosted by two white dudes who've been friends for over 15 years. Here we talk about the history and influence of anime, as well as review anime new and old. So grab your talking cap and transform into some comfy clothes as we step into a familiar territory. My name is Grant.
And I'm Brantley. Heads up, spoilers on the way. Check the description, see if you're safe to listen.
Hey Brantley, real quick question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Is this podcast organic?
Well, I wouldn't say it's artificial. Superficial, maybe, but...
Dude, I just wish they would return to the old ways of podcasting before they had technology, where people just shouted in the middle of the streets at people about their opinions on Japanese cartoons.
Well, Grant, you can do that if you just join the alt-right.
Hey guys,
for the love of God, please don't join the alt-right. I have to explicitly say that if you're a member of the alt-right, I hate you, and I want you to fucking think hard about what you've done.
Welcome to
we're
our
not
episode.
taking any risks on that. We don't want any of that in our community. Hi.
Welcome to our episode on Earth Maiden Arjuna, quite possibly the strangest shows we've ever seen in terms of themes.
Yeah, hey Grant, have you ever
Yeah, what's up?
Okay, you know when you know someone really well, and they lead in with what you're pretty sure is an anti-joke? Like an anti-joke you've heard before, and you're like, oh, I know what this is. This is an anti-joke. What's brown and sticky? Yeah, okay, I got this coming. So you're like, I know and trust this person well enough that they know that I've heard this joke before. So you're like, they're trying to twist this into something else and not do the anti-joke. So you say, okay, I'm going to play along, I'm going to bite. And you say, okay, you just say, what? What is it? What's the thing? And you wait for them to deliver the rest of the joke. And then they go ahead and they give the original anti-joke anyways. Have you ever had that happen?
Yes, and your brother does it constantly.
And it's just... And there's just this twinge of disappointment where it's like, I kind of wish, even if it wasn't funny, I just wanted to be misdirected. I just wanted this other person to prove that they had, taken the next step of thought and, done something a little more,
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that Arjuna for you?
Arjuna is a joke. It's not a very good one.
So Earth Maiden Arjuna is a 2001 anime TV original created by podcast favorites Satellite, blessed be their name, and directed by Shoji Kawamori, who is pretty damn prolific. He's created things like Basquatch, which I also hate, but he is a mech design for a lot of different mechas. He made Macross. He made Robotech. He's incredibly prolific, and he made this show, and it's bad. The story is about a high school girl and her loser boyfriend named Juna and Tokyo, and they are driving on a motorcycle, and Juna dies, and then she is resurrected as the avatar of time, and she is sent to save the world from itself, maybe? It gets messy from here. In doing so, she meets a god being named Chris, and his translator named Cindy, and a group of people dedicated to fighting off this evil beings called the Raja, called Seed. Now, the first couple episodes of the show are wild. There's a nuclear power plant that's about to explode. And they have to stop it.
Yep.
Let's talk about like the first chunk of this show.
Do you actually mind if we can we start by explaining a bit of the background from mythology? Just like
yeah,
where this came from.
I actually have notes on this if you want me to.
Yeah, sure. I took some notes too, but either way, why don't you go ahead and lead?
Yeah. So the story is inspired by the Hindu Hindu myth called the Bhagavad Gita, and it's essentially about a prince named Arjuna and his guide Krishna, which is Christ, who is so Arjuna is Juna and Krishna is Chris.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a war, and it's kind of like it talks about moral dilemmas between the two. It's super influential in the Hindu religion. And like it pulls from a lot of it.
It's a blueprint for this show, yeah.
Yeah, it's really good because like Arjuna's like spiritual guardian is named after is named Ashura, which is based off of the Asura, which are spirits in Hinduism. Arjuna's bow is called Gandiva, which is the real bow used in Mahabharata by Arjuna.
There is a cool twist too, where in the original Indian epic, Arjuna is at one point revived back to life using a Nagamani gem, and so they sort of twist that here in this Japanese anime by instead using a Japanese Magatama stone. So it's like there is a bit of that like translation over that I feel like it's interesting. I would say maybe it's fair game in that like cultural transformation sense. It's like, okay, neat. And again, there are like pieces of this that translate over, including like the like pacifist message that Arjuna's story ends at.
Kind of.
Yeah, like Arjuna the epic, and it sort of reaches that.
Yes.
This gets confused along the way, and
So this show has a couple wild twists and theming. We actually enjoyed most of the show up until about the 8th episode. So it starts off and it's talking about how the Raja are trying to destroy the Earth because of the pollution that people have brought to it, and it talks about how like there's too much consumption, and how big corporations and nations are refusing to address this issue of pollution, and it's good. It does it well. It talks about being like harmonious with nature, and there's some contradictory messages that have to deal with like organic farming and how it's actually not always super well if you're not doing it in a sustainable way. But the message is still there.
Yeah, it is like the writing's on the wall that this could go, one way or the other, like well delivered or not. And for a good amount of this, we were kind of favoring that they were going to land it. Maybe it's because it's a smaller show. I was hoping it would. Maybe it's because it's satellite and we're kind of, I have seen also from satellite, Noain to Your Other Self, and I think I liked that one. And I'm not sure I do anymore. I'll have to go back to it. But, yeah, we were optimistic that they were going to stick the landing, basically.
Yeah.
And so...
but we did play this game where we had a tightrope, and on one side, if it makes it to the end, it's going to stick the landing, and if it falls, it's going to be a story about ecofascism. And it became a story about ecofascism.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we get into ecofascism, let's talk about some of the stuff that we liked about this show.
Sure. Yeah. I personally think that one of this show's strong suits is its craft. I imagine you might do a more in-depth debrief of the staff later, but it feels like they know what they're doing when they've got like the time and capacity to make the show what they want to. This is 2001, but the 3D is pretty competent. I would say in some ways modern 3D anime almost looks just about at the same level as this. Depending on the shot. Sometimes it's very apparent that it's like, oh, that looks goofy. But I've seen some goofy 3D anime in 2019, 2020, 2021. The cinematography, or like the visual composition of the show, I feel like is very thoughtful. There are times where like, say in episode, I think 4, the camera will be placed up high to the ceiling where there's a wooden rack that's positioned in such a way where Juna and Tokyo look as if they're sort of behind bars. And so like they're not literally trapped, but that's like the camera's communicating that they are. And so like there's like neat little visual details like that. They represent the drama of character relationships with raindrops on a window and how they sort of drift together and merge and then split apart, and they have like some decent subtlety in the craft of the show that once again gets us feeling good about it. And also I think I really like Juna and Tokyo as a couple, especially early on.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that too. So to kind of build off of liking them as a couple and also the cinematography, one of my favorite scenes in the show, there's a part where Juna learns how to astral project, and she is astral projecting into Tokyo's room. And she doesn't really know how to control herself, so she's kind of like floating around, but her reactions are really fun because she's talking to Tokyo on the phone while she's doing this. And it's a really cute moment for those two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's getting visual information that Tokyo can't know she's getting, and so like when kind of like as if you get that anxiety about like if someone calls you like, hey, why haven't you shown up to work yet? You're like, oh, it's because I'm sick, and in reality, it's because you just forgot and you haven't woken up yet. And you worry like, can they see me through the phone? It's kind of like that, but played up in this like cute interchange. It's really neat.
Yeah, I really like some of the way that they hang out. The times they're just kind of chilling and doing stuff, it's really charming.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that Tokyo's character kind of drops off pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one specific moment that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit that kind of ruined his character for me. Not because the rest of his character is bad for the rest of the show, but it just kind of made me realize that they were using him as sort of a crutch to Juna instead of an actual romantic partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is sad because the first episode, that first interaction you have with him where they're on a date at the pier is just so strong. It's just so enchanting. So yeah. And again, that ties in with the craft, like they have the shot where Juna's leaning over the rail upside down, and so she sees the bird dive into the water, and the shot is flipped because of that, and it feels like at times they really love these characters and really know them well, and then that stops happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird because there's so much you want to love about this show. One of the moments we had a friend come in and watch one episode with us, and it was the episode in which she astral projected into the room.
Mm-hmm.
And during this time, Juna's trying to become less of an avatar of time and more of a girlfriend, and so she's trying to eat their fast food called American Burger.
Yeah.
But she can't eat it because when she eats it, she feels the suffering of all the animals and all the processing that it had to go through. But she's trying to do it for Tokyo. And during this time, Tokyo is with their mutual friend Sayori, and she notices them before they notice her, and she thinks that Tokyo is going to date her instead. And at this time, they've kind of hinted that might have been a thing, But here we see Sayori dressed up for a date. She's wearing like lipstick and makeup and like some pretty nice clothes.
She's got her glasses off on the side, yeah.
Yeah, but Tokyo isn't. And Tokyo actually mentioned earlier in the show that he preferred Sayori without her glasses. So Sayori thought that Tokyo was going to do it too, but Tokyo wasn't interested. He invited Sayori because he was worried about Juna, and he wanted to talk to her friend about it. And it is a very, very emotionally charged moment with lots of good visuals, with lots of good character emotions. Like, you see Sayori slowly get disappointed in that this is what's happening, and she puts her glasses back on. And Juna starts to realize what's happening, and she gets a little bit happier with the interaction. It's good. It is incredible. And this is kind of the time where I thought this show was going to stick it. I thought this show had everything in the bag. And this actually was followed by the episode I want to talk about, where Juna is upset with her teacher. So in this episode, she is learning math from her math teacher, who is teaching basically by reading out of a textbook. And it frustrates her because since she can feel the emotion of everyone being a god, she realizes that he is not talking as himself. He's talking as someone else, and it makes her upset. So she goes and visits him in his apartment, and you see all these kind of little hints that something's wrong. You see a box of toys. You see a whiteboard with like a cutesy drawing on it, and it's just a mess. And so he sits Juna down, and Tokyo leaves because Tokyo doesn't give a shit about it, and talks to Juna and asks, why does everyone get the same curriculum in school? Why is there so much waste? Why is there why is the media incredibly simplistic? Why is everything done in this streamlined way? And every single time he asks a question, Juna responds, because it's easy. And he looks at her and he's like, yeah, there's so much that is done because it's easy, and the systemic issues that plague it are something that we can't change. And then he teaches her math as a art and how it is in every single aspect of our lives. And Juna says, I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm glad that you're saying it like this. That part is so emotionally charged, and it's such coming from someone who has a background in education, it's incredible. Mm-hmm. It was so well done. And then Tokyo says, is this why your wife left you? And you're like, God damn it, Tokyo, you son of a bitch, ruining this moment. But it's good. It's incredible. And that's probably the last time that you got a good episode out of this show.
Yeah. I'm realizing now, too, that that's foreshadowing. That essentially that the teacher here is, like, describing himself being radicalized. And Tokyo brushes it off as, like, well, no one's going to find you an entertaining person. No one's going to hang around you if you're acting like this. And what do you know? That's the divide between he and Juna. And as that, the gap closes between he and Sayuri. So,
right.
Again, the show seems to know, like, what it's doing in terms of, like, its construction. But then, in terms of, like, the themes and the plot in particular, it goes wrong.
Oh boy, does it. Ah,
yeah.
Man.
Thankfully,
okay.
we're just about out of things that I liked about the show. So
we are out of things that I liked about this show.
Yeah. Two last things I can mention. Again, their attention to detail, they stick the landing with little things like characters having scars or like scabs across episodes. That's something that could get lost in translation when you're either having different people lead on, like, key animation or whatever from episode to episode. I'd expect them to just let that go. But, after the motorbike accident in episode 1, you'll see, Tokyo have scabs on his elbows for, like, episodes back to back. Additionally, later in the series, his hair roots, you can see, like, the bleach in his hair is starting to recede more and more as you see more of his natural hair color. It's like, that's neat. I'm glad they're showing that stuff takes effort.
Yeah, and even on the grander scale of things, some of the shots they do during the action sequences are really, really cool.
Mhm.
Like, throughout the series, there's a part where, and like near the end, where Juna's sort of flying by this window, and it's reflecting, and then she jumps off of it and does like a slide on a building, and she has these long light ribbons coming from her, and it's really cool. And this is a magical girl show.
Yeah.
It's not super traditional magical girl, but like she has a big ol' summon familiar that's a big ol' mech boy. She has a transformation sequence. She has a summoned weapon. I mean, it has everything that it needs to be a magical girl show. It doesn't necessarily follow a lot of the similar premises, but I would definitely be like, yeah, this is a magical girl show.
Yeah, absolutely. And to top it off, the music really helps to highlight, especially those sequences. We have to thank for that Yoko Kanno. So
absolutely
just killing it most of the time. The soundtrack is really excellent, and like it's unique too. It feels like it's inspired. It doesn't feel just kind of like any old anime orchestra that you could pull together. And it has not only like some really good, action themes for fights, but it also has like essentially like these little trills and ambient songs to play in the background that I just will just throw on and just put on loop, and I'll just let that go for half an hour, and I don't get tired of it. So kudos to that, sincerely.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And there it has a pretty sick soundtrack.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the shit.
Let's throw down.
Okay, so what is the moment that you were like, ah, fuck, it's over, it's Dunyan Rings, this shit's gone?
Yeah, I almost have a few, but like the one for sure was like the anti-abortion episode.
Yeah,
there's no competition. It's just,
oh, absolutely not.
You know what? You take it, because I couldn't really. That episode bothered me. So
it's super weird. So this episode didn't air on television because it was controversial. So it is Juna's sister comes in, who is only in this episode, smoking a cigarette. And Juna doesn't seem bothered by it, despite being bothered by a billion other things that are unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
And she starts hearing a voice saying, help me, don't do this. And her sister's pregnant. And her sister's like, well, damn, I can't have a child. I'm not that old, and I'm not ready for it. And also, I didn't really know I was pregnant at this time. So the show automatically basically says, oh, she doesn't know she's pregnant, but since Juna does, that means life is there. So it already equates like having like a clump of cells equals a living thing.
Yeah, this is a zygote that's not ready to be detected yet, right? Like this is what they're sort of like representing. To me, looked like a really early sign of pregnancy, and they're already bending the rules of the magic in the show to give it like sapience, and that's not how that works. It's just not.
Yep. And then and so that happens, and then she goes to talk to Cindy. Cindy is Chris's telepath. She can influence people's emotions, and she's like 9. And she talks about how she knows the feeling of birth because she's felt everything that's ever happened to her in the future. And it's a super weird scene where she's freaking out because her mom had sex when she was pregnant with her, which is not like scientifically a bad thing, but they treat it like it's a bad thing, and they sort of make it like a problem that her mom had sex, and it's super duper weird. And then Juna goes to her sister and says, hey, don't have an abortion, and then she doesn't. It's bizarre. And it also is weird for the theming of the show for later reasons. Mostly it talks about how since humanity is overpopulated and everyone is living together, that's why the world is dying, but don't get abortions. don't worry, culling the human race isn't a bad thing either. It's messy.
Mm-hmm.
And in both terms of like problematic like beliefs and also within its own themes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is kind of where I was like, oh man, it is ecofascism, because it started to focus on the individual. It started focusing on, you know, what one person is compared to the systemic issues, and it's bad. Mm-hmm. It's so silly.
Yeah, the feeling I get with the show is that Arjuna, as a series, is in this nosedive where essentially Juna is being radicalized, you know, regarding like environmentalism and you know, preservation of ecology throughout the series, and you're waiting for the nosedive to pull up, where eventually she gets the message about anti-violence, that she, you know, really sort of, you know, takes in and comprehends the world as a greater whole, and understands how these large powers in terms of organizations and nations are contributing to problems, and how this needs to come down at the structural level. But for some reason, the show like starts there, and then at the terminal velocity of its nosedive, it doesn't pull up. It just evens out and stays at the bottom rung, which is you as a human should be ashamed for the damage you're inflicting. And they don't ever like recover from that. And it's a bad feeling. I feel like that's like the thrust of that like eco-fascist sort of like we're killing our planet message of like, you know, like you said, cull the human race, right? You are the problem.
Right.
The show never comes back around.
Nope, absolutely not. And it's great in the sense that it's great as it's a huge mess. I was near the end of the show, I was just so happy that it became this absolute abysmal piece of media.
We got our answer. Yeah, it didn't walk the tightrope to the end. At the very least, they were bold enough to say, "Don't worry, we did take the shitty route."
There's like a part where, like in one of the episodes before, where it's revealed that Chris has like all the Raja stored in his body, and he's like protecting Earth by absorbing them and keeping them there, and they're like fighting with words, and it's so silly looking.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I love this show.
The words also, that was another, like, if I didn't say the abortion episode, I'd almost say that's one of my least favorite, because it's so that's where it really starts to focus on like you as the individual are the problem. They try to somehow insist that like language as an individualist sort of like construction divides us. Like you with your own words can't be someone else's words, and so therefore they like keep us apart or something. It's just wrong. Like it's about like, you know, influence each other and whatever. But that should also then curve back around to say, well, when you influence someone, you're collaborating or competing, and then therefore you're becoming one, or you're clustering at the very least. And they never like bring that to a close. They just talk about words in this like really like, I don't know if it's like sophistry, but like they just kind of wane about it for a while, and then the episode ends. Like it's dumb, and it's weird because Symphogear gets this right later by the same studio.
Yeah, but everyone in the show is stupider than the characters in Symphogear.
Which is, I unfortunately have to agree wholeheartedly. There was earlier when we were watching, Grant said that, and I was like, I don't know about that. Nope, he's 100% right.
There's a part near the end of the episode with words where Tokyo gets absolutely shat on by a girder falling on his head. And for some reason that means he has to have a blood transfusion.
Oh no, that's not the words episode. I don't think that's the.
No, because doesn't he do the words episode?
No,
with his dad?
that's like the emotion spray.
Oh,
That's different
right,
than
the
the
emotion
words.
spray.
That one's weird
Dude,
too.
this show's... Yeah, he goes to see his dad, who's creating a bacteria that will eat petroleum in the oceans to clean it up from oil spills, and they paint that as a bad thing. It's super weird, because the show's about environmentalism. It's about protecting the earth, but it's always... It almost has like a primitive, like a lust for the primitive, because like apparently modifying bacteria to help the planet is just as bad as destroying the planet. And modern medicine is also bad. There's a part where Tokyo is dying of a sickness, and Arjuna and in the magic school bus fashion goes inside his body as the avatar of time, and she takes medicine and it almost kills her because it's man-made, and then they save her by taking like the umbilical cord cells from when she was born and feeding it to her, and that gives her...
It was actually turned out to be her sister.
Oh, kinda, it was her sister. Okay.
But it's
cool.
the same effect.
It's the same effect. It's like, yeah, man, don't take modern medicine when you can just snort some old cells, man. And that gives her the power to influence Tokyo's dying body. Tokyo goes through a lot of medical problems in this show. And the answer is never modern medicine except for blood transfusions, which I guess kind of fits with the whole, like, the umbilical cord, and it's blood. It's your dad's blood, so it's natural. It doesn't... I mean, I guess it checks out.
They try to convince it, like, oh, it's like you two are coming together, and it's like, why? You can't you never... figure this out. They're like, words separate people, but also when Tokyo and his dad are talking and basically swapping magic spit, they eventually realize, oh, they have the same emotion, they're on the same wavelength, father and son. It's like this like Jungian like ancestral thing, and it's like, you know, kind of creepy that they insist that when they also want to say that, like, human sapience is what fucking drives everything apart and causes war and kills everything. It's both extremes, and they don't have any care to, like, bridge the two at all.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's and like the show ends with Chris being fully possessed by the Raja. And Juna's like, I know what I have to do. I have to accept the Raja. This all happens after Japan has been basically eaten by the bacteria that was made to clean up the oceans, because it started eating all petroleum-based plastics and material, which also somehow affected the water. That's never explained. Like, the bacteria is in the water, and that's bad, but it doesn't make sense why it's bad.
They try to explain it that it's infused with Raja, but then again, they've explicitly shown earlier in the show that people don't see Raja. That, like, and for example, like, they'll do these creative shots where you'll see Juna in her magic form, and then it'll swap to, like, essentially Tokyo's view, and Juna looks normal, and she's just flying around. And it's like, that's neat, but then that defeats the whole point of this Raja infused water thing. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so all
maybe
these
they're
people
trying to
have died
insist that, like, the lack of regulation then poisoned the water because other systems broke down. I don't know.
Yeah. And so all these people are sick and dying, and they can't eat or drink, which is apparently a good thing. And they talk about it. It's really weird because they're like, are you going to sacrifice all of Japan to stop this with a quarantine? And then they're like, are you going to sacrifice the rest of the world to try and save Japan? And it's like, you shouldn't, but also no one can really do this except for Juna, and she doesn't seem to want to do anything. So Juna, you either have to go and do the thing, or this is what's going to happen. But it doesn't follow its own rules, so... Who knows, man?
Should we explain the end?
That's what
I was. Are you getting there?
Yeah, you take it away.
Okay, so I don't get the Raja. I just don't. They're positioned as kind of like, what I can tell, like a karmic force in this world, where when humanity does bad stuff, pollution and violence and indiscriminate killing, then the Raja appear as like the Earth's way of fighting back. They're kind of like the Earth's antibodies. And so the message of the show is that, like, don't kill the Raja. You have to like subsume them. That's Chris's job, is to like take them in and like essentially seal them within himself and internalize them. And so I'm assuming what it's saying is you become aware of the damage that humanity has caused, and you take it upon yourself to try to make a difference. But also, they're literal actual forces of destruction that can like topple a building, and it's like that breaks the rules. That doesn't make sense. Like, you don't get to do that like that, because now this thing is actually like, it's manifested, it's real, it's a thing, it is an organism in its own right. And then they take that a step further, where at the end of the show, the Raja descends to the earth and becomes tangible. Anyone can see it, and it collapses like a whale to the bottom of the ocean and becomes food for the people.
And the lizards. Don't forget the lizards. It doesn't make sense because Chris never told Judah any of this. And he's like, Judah, why are you fucking up? Judah, why are you fucking up? And she's like, I don't know. What should I be doing? And then Chris goes as a bird and flies away. And then in the end, Chris is like, do it, Judah. And she's like, yes, I will feed you God Jello. And then Tokyo grabs the God Jello that is the Raja's body, holds it up to the stars, and say, let's eat.
Itadakimasu. And the show ends.
It's so stupid.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
I thought about it for so long as probably one of the dumbest fucking endings of anything I've ever seen.
For a show that insists that humanity should do something about all of the damage it's caused, it's amazing that the solution the show proposes is that a mystic force wipes out all technology in a Deus Ex Machina, and then everybody gets to eat like magic demon. And then everything's okay. Yeah. Here, and there's more problems with this. So, okay, the Raja falls to the earth, and they're going to eat its corpse, right? The Raja is dead, right? Right? So, what's wrong with Juna killing Raja? If she shoots them with the bow, and they go, and they split in half, and they disappear. So, isn't that, like, technically, like, no different than Chris just taking the Raja into himself and sealing them, because then it's not affecting the Earth anymore?
And
there's no life force change, because the Raja didn't exist before. They're literally material created from nothing.
Right.
Maybe you can assume that, it's like the ghosts of the souls and the energy of the things that died, but then once again, the Raja are not constantly being eaten and subsumed by the people, which means that, once again, we're somehow creating energy here. This is an imbalanced equation.
If we go back to some of its original themes, where it talked about how we produce too much food, and the problem is with distribution, you guys still have that problem with distribution by eating this demon corpse, because you can't move it across the world to, and like
it drives me up the wall.
One of the gals that works at Seed was like an environmentalist humanitarian who's like, I've had babies die in my arms because they were malnourished and couldn't get food, and yet I see people throw food away in the grocery store. And it's like, yes, because it's a distribution issue. And yes, there are problems, and we can fix it, and we totally have the means to fix it, but no one's fixing it, and that's bad. But it's not because people are throwing away food at the grocery. It's because no one's trying to distribute it. just because you have magical demon jello now does not mean that you can just distribute it anymore. It's so stupid.
I can't. It's amazing that the show is ending showing Tokyo and Sayuri like actually finding food for themselves and learning how to live in nature again, and they're rewarded by that action with the rest of the nation by dropping down god corpses that they can eat. Like, I thought the whole point was that they didn't need help, that they just needed the environment and they'd figure it out. But apparently no. We're just gonna, here, have a fucking rotten flesh-piled jello feast. Enjoy.
I'm so angry.
It's
so bad.
So bad. Like, like, we're like, hey, I really dig that you're trying to ask us to take part in our world and fix it. So, creators of Earth Maiden Arjuna, do you have any ideas? And they're already out the door, and the door hits their ass on the way out. That's it. Like, they just give up. That's the show. This show is giving up on the world. It's the most misanthropic, conclusion that they could ever bring to this. Is to say humanity should solve its problems. We say elaborate that, and they say no. Just no.
My favorite thing about this show is that it misses the mark on so many environmental perspectives. Coming from someone who studied environmentalism for quite some time, and having people that I know personally who are environmental engineers and scientists, a lot of times everything they say is like hella shallow. Like when Juna goes back to the city after spending a week in the forest. By the way, Juna is just dropped off in the forest by the government.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, fucking survive, bitch.
Figure it out.
And she figure it out. It's so stupid. And she gets back to the city, and they're like, see, the city is wasteful. The city is terrible. Don't you smell all the rotten humans? Except cities in the real world are the most environmentally friendly way to live. The big problems are sprawls, where you have like large suburban areas with lots of big houses because they require more energy to maintain, instead of people living in smaller areas that have everything they need within walking distance. There's actually this kind of new theory that's coming out of France called 2-minute cities, where everything that you need is within 2 minutes of driving at most, but everything is within walking distance, because that would eliminate emissions and pollution and overuse of energy. But the show wants people to go back to the wilderness and live, either with or without energy. But the problem is that the show also takes the stance that we don't need to kill humans to do this, but if you don't kill humans to do this, you create a sprawl, and sprawls are bad for farming practices. I know someone who is an environmental botanist who focuses on sustainable agriculture, and suburbs and sprawls are terrible for the environment. And so, like, this show likes to be very, very, like, surface level, because cities are a little bit more polluting. They are a little dirtier, and usually they have smog. But if you focus on the per capita of the people that live there, they pollute significantly less than people in the suburbs. There's just less people in the suburbs.
The fact that this show does not include a single golf course infuriates me.
Oh, it's so bad.
By the way, if it wasn't clear yet, Arjuna is not an even-handed debate. There's like rarely episodes where there's actually an opponent to what's going on. Like the one I can think of off the top of my head is Tokyo's dad, who's working on the PBD research for breaking down petrochemicals. So here's like the one character we meet who's actually trying to undo damage, and they villain him, like they vilify him.
It's so bad.
Like, and like I kind of get it. Like the show already doesn't have a lot of time, and it's trying to cover a lot of ground. But if you want a show that's also not a debate and does a better job of leading you to the conclusion of an agrarian society, go watch Decadence, because
hell yeah,
that show is going to confirm your biases and also give you some like at least like a visual representation of people fighting back and like, you know, responding to the crisis instead of something resolving itself. And the action's nice. So yeah, great, go do that instead.
I I love that this show likes to talk about like how people are dying because of all the shit that humans have done, but they never ever once mention all the people that live based off of what humans have done.
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest issues in environmentalism and leftist thinking is that when you're talking about, you know, how do you create a economically sustainable planet and an environmentally sustainable without hurting the people that civilization has helped, because like capitalism sucks and this show hates capitalism and I dig that, but you got to understand that just because something exists in capitalism doesn't mean it only exists in capitalism. Hospitals don't necessarily need to exist in a capitalistic society only, or medicine doesn't need to. Even like luxuries don't need to only exist in capitalism.
How many people make memes for money? Like,
right,
not that many.
Right. This show does not like to count, and like once again, this show did come out in 2001. It came out before An Inconvenient Truth. It came out before a lot of like go enjoy the green energy, folks. Like this show is pretty early on the green wave, and I kind of dig it for that. And I'm wondering if the creators remade the show, if they would make it with more of the scientific understanding that has been developed through environmentalism in the past 2 decades since this show's come out. But because the show, we're looking at it from today's perspective, it's not a good representation of environmentalism. It's not. Like it's you have this character. The character who is upset that children died in her arms while they were starving is also like vehemently against like GMOs and like farming practices that have helped these nations get more food, which doesn't make sense. She also has a really weird subplot where she was born intersex because her mom took medicine while she was like pregnant with her, and there's really no scientific evidence that has ever happened ever. And she is like, she doubts that she is a woman because intersex people don't normally menstruate, and she's like, I didn't do that, so I'm not a woman. And it's super weird. Like, it's non-validating. It's not, and like, once again, it's 2001, so they really didn't understand what the hell they were talking about. But also, like, it doesn't make sense from any perspective. And like,
I'm gonna look something up really quickly. Continue.
It's her character is probably one of the best characters in terms of like action and her philosophy. But she doesn't get a ton of screen time. Her character design is pretty cool. She wears a lot of awesome combat gear, although her hair is stupid as hell. It's mostly cool. She has like the short military cut, except she has these 2 pieces of hair that stick out in the back of her head, and it bothers me because I just want to pluck them. Because it doesn't make sense why you would have that.
Yeah, and like for the most part, like her intersexuality isn't like dug on directly. It's not like a character makes some kind of jab and invalidates her. It's internalized, right?
Right.
And that's real, but like it's also kind of depressing that's where the point ends. That she laments about it, and then that's where it has to be because that's how it is. And in the end, when you have to look at it as an invisible message through the plot communicating to you, the message that appears to me is that if modern medicine hadn't done this, I wouldn't be suffering. I wish I wasn't who I am right now.
Right. That
sucks. That's, you know, it's a bad stance. It infuriates me. Yeah. And like, I tread carefully on this because I don't want to, you know, simply impress that, like, well, you know, if everyone just has the same Western ideal and understanding of, you know, gender topics, then everything would be better. But when it comes to individual pain and suffering, it's like, I hate that this doesn't have any kind of, you know, stronger resolution than that.
Right.
And I feel strongly in that because at least some people in the Japanese entertainment industry were figuring it out. I'll point you to Stop Hibari-kun, which is a manga that came out in the 80s, and it's about a transgender teenage girl, and it's a little bit, sometimes, but like for the most part, it's very good at establishing a character who is transgender and not at all afraid of that. And I want to watch more of it, because it did get an anime adaptation. And again, that's the 80s. So like, not everyone would have seen this media and then also taken it to heart, but like, it's not like this stuff didn't exist in some way. It was in the culture somehow to the point where it got published.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, part of that treats it like a gag, but the gags never put that transgender main character under the wheel. It's always them saying, "Yeah, so what?" And then who ends up looking like the loser are the people who are making a big deal out of it.
Right, and that's
okay.
It's possible, right? And it's just
mm-hmm.
It's frustrating.
It's not this is not one of the worst fumbles that this show has. But this, like so many other things, you're just like, how did this not get researched more thoroughly?
And
you only hope that it's not a blind spot,
right?
Or actually, you hope it's a blind spot more than it is a political decision.
And I'd think it's a blind spot. I really do. I think a lot of this show is not coming from a place of like malicious intent. I think it's literally just a shallow understanding of like environmentalism. It's a lot of what people think environmentalism is when they haven't studied environmentalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the show kind of has its problems. I think it is either they weren't able to research everything, because I am privileged enough to live in the 2021 where I can readily access this information at the tip of my fingertip, or
mm-hmm.
find journals that have been in a lot of environmental journals were published after this show. So who's to say that they
mm-hmm.
knew it? However, it's frustrating watching now.
Yes. Yeah.
With that being said, do you have anything else to say about the general consensus of this show?
I kind of want to, I have so many little nitpick notes that I just kind of want to get out of my system. Because I started really digging this show. This is the kind of show where I would have gone to bat for.
Oh, absolutely. It has real life footage of shit mixed in with animation, and Brantley loves that shit. If you make your ending a live action version of your character sitting on a beach, it's like an automatic 5 for Brantley at least.
Oh, I've been assigned this character trait, and it's funnier to let it stay that way.
It's not a character trait; it's the truth. You literally you showed me Boogie Pop Phantom, and it has a live action opening, and I immediately was like, yeah, this is a Brantley show. And you're like, how do you say? And then you talk about your favorite parts of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and they are also the parts that include live action moments.
Not all of them. What? Fine. Roast me like fucking. Like Chris in hell.
No, he lived, remember?
Hey, by the way, Chris, yeah, but they thought he was gonna die, and he was like, feed my body to the crows. Like, bitch, they have food. You explain that to us. Like,
yeah.
Use your body for fertilizer. For heaven's sakes. Speaking of which, I have so many little frustrations with this show and what it gets wrong. It insists on like never giving humanity any credit. That's why I call it misanthropic. Because it doesn't see anything like both ways. I don't think a character ever like discusses recycling in this show once.
No.
At all. We've already talked about food waste and transportation, which I think maybe gets actually mentioned in the teachers episode. But then again, practically every good point that's made in that episode is undermined and later in the show. In the process of everything breaking down due to the petrochemical stuff getting eaten by the bacteria that's released out into the world. By the way, a bacteria research lab somehow like goes into a meltdown mode and collapses So like, yeah, apparently that can happen. But in the process of everything breaking down, disability aids such as Tokyo's glasses end up getting broken in the process, and they show Tokyo actually tripping and falling and nearly, being hurt, because he can't see well enough. This does not fit this show's like survival of the fittest, like Darwinist bullshit at all. Like they're actually taking away disability aids, and they have no comment other than just like, oh look, he still found food. Like, are you shitting me? Like, Tokyo smells some berries. Yeah, like, no way. Like, nearsightedness and everything. Like, he should be, the least likely to be able to survive in that outcome. And yet they just hand wave it. It's insulting. Somehow Chris gets to keep his little like telescoping walking stick. So
don't worry.
Ed Grant pointed that out. So fuck that. And like, these are things where we could say, well, yeah, disability aids can also be incredibly pricey, and therefore they're exclusive, and that's wrong. Totally. But this show doesn't want to have that conversation, Yes, we have to free these things from capital, but this show doesn't talk about that. It just says, goodbye, technology, and that's the end of the thought. It's actually... Go ahead.
I just said, let's eat Ikadiki Boss.
Yeah, that solves all the world's problems. Everybody in that show who was using a wheelchair or a motorized, vehicle to bring themselves around, they probably just died. It's the show inevitably, whether it's intentional or not, advocates for eugenics.
They killed
and that's
Sayuri's
shitty.
dad for driving a car.
Yeah. Oh, that's the joke I could have made. Yeah, roast me like Sayuri's dad.
Jesus.
Yeah. Should we cut that out?
You said it. He and like, it's so stupid because he crashes and he's like, damn, I crashed my car, and he's fine, and they're like, oh, hi, Dad, and then it just incinerates. It's so dumb.
The car bursts into flames because he wrecks it, and then it sparks and it blows up.
Yeah.
Like,
and they don't.
And he can't get out the door for some reason.
Yeah, they like talk about it for like maybe a couple seconds after it happens, and Sayori's little sister's like, when's Dad coming back? And that's it. Like, they don't deal with the emotional trauma of it. They don't talk about it after it. It is literally to be like, man, how are we going to show that these bacteria mean business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They don't at all like discuss the lengthening of lifespans with modern medicine. Again, like, fuck anybody who gets sick.
Yeah.
Or has like a compromised immune system or something like that.
Just eat berries.
Humanity will never have a compromised immune system because naturally you'll evolve it out. Well, someone had to die for that to happen.
Yeah, that's mentioned. That's mentioned. They talk about that.
Like, it's so dumb that they don't bring it back around to then actually digress. Like, yeah, this doesn't actually work all the way.
And once again,
they don't do it.
It's that shallow understanding of science. There is scientific evidence to suggest, like, hey, if you play outside as a kid, your immune system naturally gets better, so you're healthier as an adult. Or if you the overprescription of antibiotics is a huge problem in the medical community because, once again, it's tied to capital. You sell these antibiotics, you get money. But sure. But like, and so yes, there is a over reliance on specific medicine. But they take the blanket and they just cover the whole entire medical industry. They're like, all medicine is bullshit. If this show was made now with the same kind of understanding of science, it would be anti-vax.
Mm-hmm. Yep, totally. I mean, and that's kind of what they're seemingly getting at with, that like the side effects of medicine are not worth what's being involved there, or like, medicine is, do you know what's in that medicine? You know where that stuff goes, and the blah blah blah. Yeah, totally, 100%.
It's incredible.
There's the whole premise beginning with nuclear energy, and and from what I understand, it's one of our safer alternatives.
Yes.
So like
the big issue for nuclear energy is we don't really know how to get rid of the waste. That's kind of like the big problem. And like I do want to say that Japan has a little bit of an iffy relationship with nuclear technology for very good reasons. But they're also one of the leading countries that uses it for electrical production. So it's not uncommon for Japan to have messages about the dangers of nuclear technology. That's Godzilla, right? So it's not uncommon for that to be a thing. But yes, the nuclear technology is most for energy production is normally a safe, efficient way to do things.
It's fear mongered, and it's like, and again, they sensationalize it by showing like, oh, this thing could blow up. Meanwhile, like you said, why not go for the jugular and just be like, now this thing's not going to explode with any near likelihood, but you know what the problem is, and then they talk about the waste and that sort of thing, especially for that time period, which I imagine in the span of 20 years, we've probably made some advancements. So back then, certainly they would have had something to talk about there, but instead they fictionalize it. And then that, it sort of removes the point entirely. It's irritating. Another one, like media and like television and video games, like that they kind of imply that those aren't good for you, and like, sure, all things in moderation, but then they never close it off, and they almost just come back around to say, oh, material possessions are a way to show like you just love each other and you don't have time or whatever. I don't know, they do this weird forgiveness thing where like they absolve Tokyo's dad of responsibility for not being there as he grew up, because he just didn't know how to be a good father, and then like that just patches it up right in time for them to go through the whole like research lab meltdown. Stupid. It's, again, they're not being clear with what they actually want to change. They're just saying this thing sucks. Entertainment media, I think, has a powerful impact on people and their, living situation. The fact that, like, someone, again, there's still, like, exclusivity through capital, but the fact that someone can more easily get to the internet and learn things, and across borders, I think that's important. That perhaps you're in a new country, you've immigrated, and you can go to a public library and you can access the internet and read things from your own country, even though the library is not physically stocked on them. Cool. There are barriers there, absolutely. Do you know how to use the technology? Are you familiar with it? Is there someone capable of assisting you if you aren't? But still, none of this has, the time or care to enter the conversation with this. All they want to do is complain, like I'm doing.
So yeah, this show's a mess. It is incredibly misguided, and it has no idea what it wants to be. Well, now that we kind of done shitting on this show for a little bit, I do...
Oh, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah?
Sorry, one more thing. This show is like, don't kill Raja, and it never actually talks about, like, human warfare.
Oh.
It talks about, like, killing bugs and shit. Pesticides.
Which is weird.
But, like, they never actually are like, why are humans killing each other? You think that would be super easy.
Well, and what's...
That's, like, the easiest, message you can send. No one disagrees with that.
Yeah. And the Bhagavad Gita, or Gita, the story that this was inspired by, was about a war. Like,
yeah,
like that's what the inspiration is about, human warfare.
It doesn't touch that at all. There's surprisingly little death positivity too. Like, they talk about the life cycle, but there's no part in which, like, they embrace it like, oh, we've lost this person, but that still means something.
Right.
You know, they don't ever touch on that.
Right.
Because again, the show has to commit to the idea that humans are a bad thing, so them not being around is kind of a good thing.
Yes.
And so they just don't talk about it. They just push it under the rug.
I want to talk to about a couple more people who worked on this show.
Okay.
So the big one that I think is interesting is Hiroshi Unogi. He is the script and storyboard for the entire show. Now, of course, different people work on different episodes, but he is the main guy for this show. Now he hasn't done too much other series compositions, but he has done the screenplay for some of the Code Geass movies. But his big call to fame is that he is the script and series composition for Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
I could see that.
So like, and like I get that is some he didn't write it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he was able to put together, okay, this is what the anime needs from your
original work, yeah.
And he didn't write the script for the show either. He was just the storyboard and series composition. But the fact that he was able to he has the talent to make something, you know, hey, this is all we need. Here's how we're going to compose it. Here's what we're going to do. It's like, wow, that guy's good. He must have had a hard time working with this show.
Oh, yeah. That's another thing. The show likes to will make a definitive point about efficiency and productivity and how these as like capitalistic restraints essentially just make things worse. It's a chase down to the bottom of the barrel, and it hurts everybody. I only hope that irony didn't like actually strike the working staff on the project as like, you know, the show is being made. If this show is made in the same kinds of anime production conditions that Grant and I are aware of, then that just must be like a cruel situation to be working through. To have the show be like, this shit sucks. Also, go get your fast food break and come back. Like,
yep.
You know.
I do want to give some credit to a guy as well.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think the character designs in this show are really fun.
Yeah.
The guy that did that, or the person, is Takahiro Kishida. And most of his character design work actually comes from translating manga characters into anime characters,
mm-hmm.
or working on light novel characters. So he's the character designer for Bakano, Dorora, Batum. There's another one. Heat Guide J, he helps with. I just thought that you would like that. Haikyuu is another one he worked on.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually one of the people that helped JoJo Bizarre Adventure Part 5.
Huh.
And Madoka Magica.
Yeah.
So he's not the guy that created the characters for Madoka Magica, but he's the
right.
one that kind of helped translate them into an anime format.
Yeah.
So this guy's talented, and his work is really good here. I actually really like most of the character designs.
Mm-hmm.
From like I like the military people look like good military people, but they still kind of have like that fantasy element to it. He's also the character design for like Serial Experiments Lane. So like, good on this guy.
Again, production's one of this show's strong suits. In a way, I almost kind of resent that, because like the production value does sink you in. You know, it's what sort of gets you through a lot of this show and its messages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how it's composed, how it's organizing itself in the beginning, and just like the actual scenarios they're bringing you through are really interesting to watch. But knowing where it ends up, I almost wish it was just shit end to end. You know,
there is something like I made a joke on the Twitter about how there are shows that I enjoyed less than watching Gibiate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even like X-Arm. Because if a show is trash from start to finish, there is some fun to have with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, oh, you can turn your brain off. I don't really like that phrase, but you know, you can you can not think too much about it because it's just gonna be garbage.
Mm-hmm.
Arjuna has so much good in it in terms of production values.
Mm-hmm.
It's just bad.
Yeah, nothing can save the messages that are coming through with the writing.
Right. So I don't think we need to discuss themes with the show. I feel like most of the discussions we've had have gone through that.
I want to have one more death throw with it, if you wouldn't mind, but it'll be short.
Yeah, man.
So, okay,
go for it.
Yeah.
Use your finisher on this.
So like, Arjuna is like, as we've mentioned, it's very much about, like, you know, the violence and selfishness of individualism, and from what I can pair out of it, of like sapience. I think they make this clear from the get-go. Not like clear in the sense of like, oh, I know what the show's about, but they set it up really well. With Juna and Tokyo at the pier, and Juna asks, "Hey, why do the birds dive into the water to catch fish when they could probably just, eat insects when they're flying around, or anything else that's easier than that?" And Tokyo thinks about it for a moment. He's like, "Well, it's probably because they like it." And that's Tokyo projecting onto the bird as a sapient human being with a complex intelligence and acquired tastes. The show ends up, breaking down, you as a human have developed these, these tastes and these wants, these desires that end up sort of displacing the order of nature. You want something, so you're going to try to get more of it, and then that's inequitable as a transaction in nature in some way, and so you're taking more than you're giving. And the show kind of ends up elaborating that through different scenarios. Some of them are literally about like food and whatnot. The way that meat animals are kept in these unpleasant conditions for efficiency, but they're put in that situation because we get the food we want out of it, rather than us taking what is given to us. And so it's about selfishness and whatnot. But in turn, it's also very much about mindfulness in, I would say the first half of the show, in which like the characters are literally practicing through chakra and, chanting mantras, to go into this like, calm and thoughtful space. It's about being attuned to nature and noticing the little things, and sort of removing yourself from the greater scheme to look down to the micro scale and appreciate just what's in front of you. That doesn't require a lot of sapience. It just requires your own instincts and your intuition. And so, that's kind of what the show is going for, right? That for all the complexity we try to project onto the world, we don't need all of that. And in the worst cases, that kind of selfish desire that arises from complexity ends up inevitably causing violence, right? Violence caused by us taking more than we need, and then disrupting the system. Violence from fighting over things, directly, that we're competing for resources, or violence and neglect, that we're so focused on the resources we want to have that we're not sharing them to the people who need them. And then, that ultimately you don't end that anti-violence until everybody does together. And so, that's what the show is going for. And in the grand scheme, I can appreciate that. But the plot elements, such as there being no visible repercussions for killing Raja, the fact that nobody has an actual plan for dismantling the things they're angry about, and they get out of it with the Deus Ex Machina, the fact that everything falls to disaster, and then things get okay, and they don't describe that, oh, we've broken the cycle. Who knows? Maybe humanity will just rebuild the exact same way, considering that all the other nations of the world are still thriving with their technology. What's most likely to happen in this plot is that Japan is going to be, essentially subjugated, or otherwise colonialized because they have no technology of their own to keep up. Well, let's inject ourselves with the rest of the world again, everyone who's still used to these desires or needs additional assistance. The themes are essentially once again swept away by what the actual plot is trying to give in.
Oh yeah.
And of course, all of this talk of violence is strictly abstracted. When it comes to actually people fighting each other, they have no mention of it. It's just don't kill Raja, which Raja do and don't exist. So like fucking fine, great. Hate this job. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Yeah, okay, themes are done. Themes are done.
And they're bad. Is there a recommendation of the show to anyone? Do you think that the show is fun to watch, to shit on, or do you think that it's just a miserable pile of garbage from start to finish?
I want to say that no. I can't in good faith. Like, I just can't. You know
what? The best way I would show this to people is show them clips of some of the cool stuff that happens. I would show the teacher speech. I would show the part where she's in Tokyo's room. I would even show some of the early fight scenes. I think there's a lot to be influenced by this show. But if someone's like, "Hey, I want to watch an environmentalist message show," I'd be like, "Don't watch this one."
Yeah, that's fair. Because I think on the component level, you can excise parts of this show and not have them, it feels sometimes like this show does, like it's highly conflicting. So thereby, if you do remove some parts, then they weren't affected in the first place, or else the writing would have been more coherent. So that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, proof of that, they literally didn't air episode 9, I think, the pregnancy episode, and they could remove that episode from the show and it doesn't greatly impact anything at all. Kaine doesn't show up again. She was only briefly mentioned before with the whole umbilical cord thing in the medicine episode. Like, yeah, you could probably splice a supercut out of like the better bits of this show. It's not like they gave an answer to how to solve this stuff anyway, so like yeah.
So Brantley, do you have any hypotheticals for me?
I do. I can't guarantee that they'll be good, but I do.
Are they ever? I'm just kidding. That's what I mean.
I suppose not. They'd be better if they had real live action footage to watch along with. Set the mood. Anyways, okay, so hypothetical number 1. The script of Arjuna becomes the new legislative law of the land. What Steve Jobs-esque fate do you meet with now that you're living en natural?
Let's see problems that I have. Physically, I'm in pretty good shape. I have bronchitis, but that won't affect me hardcore until I'm really old. Man, you know what? I'm good. Someone might accidentally think that I'm Sasquatch because of my incredible amount of body hair, and kill me because they think I'm Sasquatch. I do have glasses, but I don't need them too much. I can see perfectly fine without them. Physically, I'm pretty okay to live out in the wilderness. I know how to make a fire. I know how.
You do like camping a lot.
I love to camp. I'm pretty good at finding. I know what foods and roots you could eat. Fuck, Brantley, am I good at this shit?
I mean, sure.
I mean, yeah. Not like I probably could last a week, right? Like I'd be like, all right, I know how to last long enough for someone to find me if I get lost in the woods, but not enough to live. But I could probably last a week to a month.
Yeah.
What about you, Brantley?
I feel like I would just maybe like a day or two just drop dead from like poor diet. I'm already not convinced that like even if I did find edible things that I could survive off of it. I can only assume that my body only understands how to use like carbs and sugar at this point. That if it recognizes anything other than that, it's just going to like reject it.
It's like that one Drake and Josh episode.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I like mushrooms, but like,
There you go.
But am I gonna eat it when there's an ant crawling on it? Maybe, or I'll just die before then. I am probably like the polar opposite of Grant. I hate camping and I don't want to do it, and I'm bad at it. Yeah. You know what? I feel like I would die shitting. I don't know why, but it would happen. It would.
Well, it's actually a common way that people used to die, is from diarrhea, because it dehydrates your body like super fast, and then they drink bad water to get rid of the dehydration, and that causes them to have more diarrhea. So diarrhea was actually a way that a lot of people died before modern medicine and modern water treatment techniques.
Yeah, so I'm going to point to the stands on that one. All right. Next up, you are tasked with creating an anime based in some form of mythology. Pick a source and come up with a premise.
So let's see, mythos that I know. I know Greek, not super well in Roman. Know a little bit of Norse now. You know, I was a big ol' Christian boy growing up. So I'm gonna make a super edgy Christian based apocalypse scenario with like, I'm just going to make Left Behind, that really terrible like Christian propaganda movie, but in an anime, and I will also make it anti-capitalist somehow. What I would do is I would make the anime would start out with the main characters watching Left Behind. And they are what I like to call right wing. They are like right wing evangelicals, right? Like terrible racists, hates everyone, and just loves capitalism. And then the rapture happens, and everyone else disappears except for right wing evangelicals, and so they have to survive in the Christian apocalypse, thinking that this isn't the Christian apocalypse.
Beautiful. I love it. I do love that this still has to be within anime. Yeah. I'm trying to picture like what an anime right-wing evangelical looks like. You know what? There's Rantsonas for that. Yeah, I can picture it now. Okay, we can move on. Okay, mine. Also, I was raised Catholic, and so that's where mine also goes. But here's my thing. I always liked the stories where like Jesus would just come and like heal somebody, and everyone would be like, "Well, what the fuck?" And then he just like walks it off. So I would want it to be like a fucking like Carmen Sandiego-esque situation in which like a small band of main characters are following these mystery situations in which people are like healed, or like some kind of situation gets overturned, and it always ends up being Jesus. But like but they only figured that out at the end of the episode, and then he kind of like pulls like a sayonara, and he's gone again. They're like, oh, we have to follow him, and so like it still technically falls into the whole like religious indoctrination sort of pool, but you also get this like mischievous Lupin the Third kind of edge to it. That's what I got.
Yes, I like that. That's actually a lot of fun.
Okay.
Are we done with the Arjuna episode?
We are, Grant. So what are we going to do next time?
I do believe that we are continuing our deep dive into the satellite production, and we are going to watch Symphogear GX.
Symphogear GX.
Hell yeah, dude. I'm so stoked for this one, because this is the one that I remember the most, and it's the one that I liked the most. I'm not sure if I'll continue that thought. Thank you so much for listening to us get really pissed off at probably a harmless, just shallow anime. If you liked what you listened to, you can subscribe, comment, or like. You can follow us on Twitter. I post some pretty dark shit, and it's good.
Yeah, you can see Grant at large corporations and dismantle them by asking if he can own their account on social media.
I don't think Gibiate is a large corporation.
They got the fucking Final Fantasy guy to do art for them. Like, there's something important.
Or you can ignore everything we said, because we are not the death gods that are trying to punish humanity for its hubris.